powerhouse. When will you start delivering? Trains are a joke. The motorways are rammed despite 208 million spent on the M60. Those were overrun by 18 months. How much were the contractors penalised by? What happened to the money?
Well, that's a good question to start on, and definitely 18 months in, transport is my biggest challenge, no doubt. You're right, it's been a terrible year on the railways, everybody knows that. We have minimal control, I'm afraid, over the railways because of the way that they're run. It's been difficult on the roads because of roadworks. And the roadworks you mentioned, particularly are Highways England, so they're not under our control either. So this is probably going to sound like, making excuses, but all I can say to you, when you sit where I sit, I just see a transport system that is completely fragmented, isn't connected, and some of these national bodies like Network Rail or Highways England, they just make decisions and don't really talk to us. So the smart motorway is a great example of that. I think it's been a badly managed scheme that has overrun, that's caused a lot of chaos for a lot of people. And even when it's completed, I'm not sure the benefit is as big as we thought it might have been. But the truth of the matter is, Greater Manchester isn't responsible for those roadworks, and we're not responsible for the overruns, and we just have to pick up the consequences. And this is why the transport system can't really continue in the way that it is. Greater Manchester needs the same powers as London to get control of its transport system. And I've launched a campaign to that effect. We need the same things that they can do over the box junctions, because London enforces its box junctions. It can have red routes. It can fine utility companies if they overrun on roadworks. We can't do any of those things. And particularly with Highways England, I think we need devolved control over what they do. Because if we did have that level of control, I think we would have said delay those smart motorway works on the M62, particularly given we knew we had to do the Regent Road roadworks. But at the moment, we can't coordinate in that way. So I'm sorry if it sounds a bit of like a long excuse, but transport is a major issue now. It needs a clear plan to get a grip on it, and I am asking the government for all of those powers that enable us to do that. We want full devolved control like London has.
Because we stick with transport, we keep hearing about HS2 being able to get from Manchester to London in less than 2 hours. That's still going to take me 2 hours to get to Manchester from anywhere else.
Yeah, I think we need all of this investment. I wouldn't say it's a choice of do we have HS2 or do we have investment. I think the north of England needs massive investment across the board. And when it comes to HS2, I would, if you made me choose, I would choose west to east investment across the north. I think that is the single highest priority for this country. However, that will also be linked to HS2. And I think that one of the problems we have is it's not so much Manchester-London as Manchester-Birmingham. If anybody lives here and they've got a meeting in Birmingham or they're going to see family in Birmingham, currently they would probably drive rather than get on a train. And it should be the case that we have a much quicker, better service, and HS2, of course, would deliver that. So I think we need both. We need north, south, and west, east. We need all of this investment. And I'm not going to let the government make us choose. I'm not going to let them say, oh, well, you can have this or you can have that. You can't have both. I'm going to say, well, we need both.
Because it has been another bad week, hasn't it? In a long series of bad weeks for getting around.
Terrible. Shocking. There's no excuses from here. But what I would say is it's the railways that are mainly responsible. TFGM are here tonight. The estimate is about 5% of the cars on the road are extra cars caused by people's loss of confidence in the railways. So people have turned back to their cars for their commute. And we think it's about 5% or so extra. But that's enough to make it feel a lot more busy. And it's ongoing. We've had promise after promise from the rail companies. I don't think the government has held them to account properly. In the end, they still run the railways, and it's just not good enough. It really isn't good enough. it's not been great for anybody, but particularly for people who live in Bolton. I mean, they've been promised the electrification of the Bolton line. It's delayed again. We have 3 weekends of rail works through December. You know, I just still think the North is treated as second-class citizens when it comes to transport. You know, our daily issues aren't as big as the issues that commuters in London have to the eyes of politicians and civil servants down there. And investment up here always comes after investment in London and the South East. And, you know, it's my job as mayor to challenge that, and I am trying to use my voice to challenge that. But, yeah, it's nowhere near good enough. And, you know, I'm fed up with the excuses of the rail companies. You know, it's leaves this week, it will be, what is it? You know, it's everything, isn't it? They use everything, and they've run out of excuses. They're on borrowed time, so let me be clear about this. If they don't improve by May, and I mean improve, get up to what they should be doing under their franchise, I will call for the removal of their franchise.
Has anyone here swapped train for car?
Who would run it? Well, there's a public ownership option, isn't there, where we've seen on the East Coast, where the failure of the franchise led to a management company being created to run the franchise, and that's happened a few times now on the East Coast main line. And the evidence has been, where that has happened, is that the services have been pretty reliable, and of course we aren't seeing all of the money going out of the running of that line into shareholders. Yeah, I think there's been an appointed management company where the East Coast has been managed effectively by the public sector. Yeah.
What sort of funding are you going to try and get from
Yeah.
What sort of funding are you going to try and get from central government if you win the case to bring, you know, transport under your reign?
It's billions of pounds of funding. So there's two things, isn't there? There's infrastructure, and then there's funding just to help subsidise the services. We've got a situation where it's cheaper to travel on public transport in London than it is here because of the way the subsidies work. When it comes to infrastructure, Northern Powerhouse Rail, as it's called, which is a major system linking Liverpool through Manchester to Leeds, Sheffield, Hull and Newcastle, is roughly about £30 billion. And our argument, and it's not just my argument, I'm making this argument with all of the northern cities, we are saying very clearly to the government, we should be ahead of the queue when it comes to London wanting Crossrail 2. There is no way on God's earth that they should be funding Crossrail 2 in London before Northern Powerhouse Rail. We should be at the front of the queue for that investment after HS2. So it is billions of pounds. But after all, no one in this room asked for a Northern Powerhouse. We were promised a Northern Powerhouse by the government, and it's about time, in my view, they made good on that promise.
Anyone else on transport? Just wait.
Sorry, why is Metrolink run by why is Metrolink run by the people who used to run Southern Rail in London? Like, why isn't it run directly by TfGM?
Well, it could be, but I think the decision has been made since Metrolink was created that it's better run by companies who are used to running those systems. So TfGM, when it created Metrolink, wasn't a light rail operator, and it through its contract, brought in companies who can do that. And I would say that Metrolink is the best part of Greater Manchester's public transport system. And just remember this, it's the only part that's fully under Greater Manchester's control. So the railways aren't, the buses aren't, because they're deregulated. We've got indirect influence over both, but the only bit that we fully control is Metrolink. And Metrolink is carrying a record number of passengers. Bob Morris from TfGM could probably give you the figures, but it gets higher all the time. We think we've picked up extra Metrolink passengers because of the problems on the railways. We've tried to use Metrolink to help people with the costs of travel. So we've introduced a new cheap ticket before 7:30 in the morning, a £1 ticket, to try and encourage more people to be in their commute earlier and use public transport. So where we have got control over the system, we're using it, and you can see that through what we're doing with Metrolink. You know, some of the roadworks that we've got in the centre of Manchester are linked to the extension of Metrolink through Old Trafford, Trafford Park to the Trafford Centre. So while that is obviously difficult for everybody right now, if you can imagine it, once that Metrolink line is in place this time next year, Bob, yeah? Are you going to overrun like Network Rail? No, he assures me not. Passenger services, we think, will be starting January 2020, we think, don't we? About
early 2020.
Early 2020, that's about that. But if you think about it, that'll be a massive improvement in terms of the numbers of people then who will use Metrolink. And I hope with it going to the Trafford Centre, it might encourage people to park and use Metrolink to come in, and that will help us as well. So the answer is it's the most successful, one of the most successful light rail systems anywhere in Europe. It's carrying a record number of passengers, and it's run by a company, Keolis are the company running it at the moment, because they have more expertise in directly running a rail network of that kind than in-house in TFGM.
Can I ask the £1 before 7 o'clock deal? Could you just expand on that? 'Cause when I read it, it has to be used before 7 o'clock.
7:30.
So 7:30.
Yeah.
So I've got to get off the tram in Manchester before 7:30.
Board, I think, or is it get off?
You have to
Finish your journey before 7. Yeah, 7:30, isn't it? Yeah. You have to buy your... Yeah, because people can hear you on there. Yeah.
The ticket, the early bird ticket, what time are you allowed to purchase that?
Until 7 o'clock. This is where it gets, a little confusing.
So from
and then
12 o'clock till 7 o'clock?
1 o'clock in the morning, I think, until 7 in the morning.
All right, okay.
And you can use it, and I think as Bob was saying, complete your journey by 7:30, any time up to 7:30.
Yeah.
So it's only a pilot at the moment, and we're kind of, we're interested in views about it. But the logic is, Metrolink, as I said, is very popular. So at the peak times, which you would say is 7:30 to 9, and then say 5 to 7 in the evening, it's becoming overcrowded. So there's, you can't really cope with many more passenger volumes at those times. However, when trams start running in the morning, there is what you would call latent capacity there. So the trams are emptier then, and actually we're thinking, well, how can we get more people on the trams then to use that capacity, and hopefully, then get people in early and get them off the roads. So that the early bird is designed to do that. And at the latest figures I was given, we have around 500, just short of, who are beginning to use this thing. And of course, I've got it in my mind that it's good for shift workers. A lot of NHS workers have been in touch with me saying it's really good for them because their shifts often start around 7 in the morning. So it's a really good thing for certain workers who start.
Introduce another one at the rush hour in the evening at the same time, for half an hour, let's say.
Well, it is. I mean, you can buy a £1 single ticket under early bird in the morning, or you can buy a £3 return. But you then have to travel again outside of the peak hours when you're coming home with that ticket. It's a little complicated, but it's obviously designed to get people on the trams when we know they're not overcrowded, and we're trying to use the capacity that's there that gets more people on the trams when we can safely carry more people on the trams. We've got 27 trams on order, so you will see more trams appearing on the network around the same time actually that the Trafford Park extension opens. So we are doing what we can within the budget that we've got to get Metrolink carrying more of the transport burden in Greater Manchester, but it's not going to solve our transport problems on its own.
Okay, so we're going to move on to Brexit.
Oh, thanks. Transport to Brexit.
This is from Tracy Jones. You said in September 2018 that we should only consider holding a second vote if it was looking like we would crash out of the EU with no deal. The vote would be a last resort when everything else had failed. Now that Theresa May has set out her plans for her Brexit deal, and it's so far removed from what was originally outlined in 2016, Is it now time for a second vote?
Well, I don't jump straight. I mean, so I can understand why some people do, but I don't. Why? Because it would have consequences, in my view. It wouldn't be without consequences. The first referendum was challenging in terms of what it did on the street. And I always remember, don't forget, my friend and one of my colleagues at the time lost her life during that referendum campaign. I don't think people should forget that. I don't think a second vote in the current mood of the country would be any easier. I think it would in fact be harder. And I think it would potentially widen and entrench those divisions between people. However, all of that said, I think it is a valid option if we are looking, if we're like, there's the cliff edge and we're about to go over it and it's no deal. I think that vote would then comes into play. Because I don't know if you saw the figures yesterday, did you see them? If we crash out without a deal, it's minus 9.4% on the Greater Manchester economy. Now, honestly, don't listen to some of these people in double-breasted suits with double-barreled surnames down in London who, for them, it seems to be a bit of a game about, oh, well, we can crash out, it's fine. I don't think it is fine. Greater Manchester sends more of its exports to the European Union than the UK average. 57% of our exports go to Europe. So it therefore follows that no deal hits us disproportionately hard. The England average, I think, is 47. So we are significantly above the England average when it comes to exports to the EU. So we need an agreement with them so that we can carry on, those companies can carry on trading without the risk of going out of business. So I'm really clear about it. No deal is a nightmare for Greater Manchester, and we shouldn't let it happen. However, I still think we're in the space of, I don't know what can be done to strengthen what's been put on the table to build more support for it. I don't think it is particularly inspiring what is on the table, but I still think working from that package and trying to make it better is where the debate should be.
Because it's not looking great, is it?
That's an understatement of the... I mean, I look back at my old world, that I used to be in before I came there, and I just feel, I don't know how you all feel, but Parliament to me looks increasingly out of touch, and they're all in these entrenched positions, and these kind of... It doesn't feel to me as though people are trying to build consensus in there and trying to put the country first. It doesn't feel like that. Go on, no, come jump in.
That was actually my question, actually. So the point that I was trying to make was that I think at the moment what's being offered is not actually pleasing anybody on either side. People who voted to remain obviously want to remain, but even people who voted to leave, what's being offered is not what they actually voted for 2 years ago. So, unless we have another referendum, I can't see that anybody is going to gain on either side from what's actually being offered on the table. And yeah, crashing out is not an option either. So you talked about civil unrest on the streets. I read that in an article. I don't know whether that's a strong feeling still for you.
I think, and I don't know whether I thought colleagues from GMP were here tonight. I mean, I don't want to overstate the case, but as I said, last time there was an MP was killed on the streets last time. Civil unrest is a pretty regular sight on the streets of Greater Manchester at the moment in these fevered and quite polarised times in which we live. We have far-right groups here, not every weekend, but quite often. And that does create unrest where there's then a kind of left-wing group, and it's not a good thing to see. So I don't want to be overstating what that would mean, but I do believe a second referendum in the mood of the country at the moment, I think would create even bigger challenges than the first one in terms of the kind of the tone of the debate and the atmosphere that would surround the debate. And I just say that representing a seat at the time that voted heavily Leave. I'd never experienced anything like it on the streets of Leigh. People with any, I saw people being screamed at, if they were wearing different clothes or different colour skin, it was not good. And I think sometimes it may not have been the same everywhere, but I can be honest, and so in certain places it was a really, really toxic sort of atmosphere around. And I just think you have to think about that before everyone might say leaps to the fact that it's a panacea that solves all of our ills. I honestly don't. I think it will give us other problems that we may not anticipate. And I'm just giving you, that's my belief. And I think we had elements of civil unrest last time, actually.
Yep.
Can I make a couple of points about what you said? I think it's really dangerous if you get into a position where you think that we're making political decisions that affect all of us, that make us all poorer, because we're frightened of a really tiny minority of right-wing thugs. And we should... Thank you. Thank you. I just think that is not something we should be taking into account, just letting a very small minority dictate the way this country goes. The other point I made is I think the validity of the last referendum is very much in question. We've got the illegality, we've still got the Russian money being investigated, we've got the fact that nobody voted. On referendum day, I was on a Remain stall and I had a Leave stall just a few feet away, and we were chatting in that nice civilised way you do. And they were saying, they were promoting Leave, and they were saying we're going to be in the European Free Trade Area. And this was a set of Leave, what's the word? Promoters, yeah. Now, are you telling me now people knew what they were voting for when the people on a Leave promoting stall were so far out what we've actually got? I don't think only no deal is the case where we should be looking at thinking again. I think we should be looking at the whole thing again, because nobody wants to be poorer. Nobody was voting to be poorer 2 years ago. I think the fact that people were so misled, given such poor information, and talking about your constituencies, in Manchester, 9 out of 10 of the constituencies that voted Leave, all the recent polling shows they've now switched to Remain. So why shouldn't people have a chance to make an informed decision this time? Why should they be forced to go along to get poorer based on lies? That's my point. Those are my points.
No, I was listening very carefully to what you said. I just want to start by saying it's not just that the far right will gain some oxygen from it, which I believe they would, but that's not the whole reason. I think it would potentially enrage a lot of the people who voted Leave, not just those. And I think, in my view, I think you would have a very, very fractured society if we had a second. I think we already do, but I think it would be even worse. And I think the chances of bringing the country back together again would be set back, I think, by even longer. That's just my view. I mean, I appreciate you might have a different view, but I think a second vote would really, make that rift in our society very, very deep. You say that nobody voted to make themselves poorer, but I'm afraid I hear that said all the time in the media, but that isn't the case in Lee. People on the doorstep were saying to me, we know that this might hit, but we still are voting for it. We know it might damage our economy, but we're still voting for it. So I don't know. I think people did know I think it's many people knew exactly what they were voting for. And I don't think necessarily there's been the shift in the polls that you might think there has been. Now, but I'm not saying I dismiss what you're saying either, because, I voted Remain. I can still see a case for a second referendum, particularly if we're getting closer to that cliff edge. So I'm not necessarily dismissing at all what you're saying. But, and here comes the but, I don't want us to sound wrong in any way or arrogant, but I am in a different position to everybody else in that it's not just what I think personally. I'm in a public representative position where I do have to think about all of the communities of Greater Manchester, the cohesion of Greater Manchester, the places that voted Leave, the places that voted Remain. 7 of our boroughs voted majority to leave, 3 voted majority to remain. So I have to have a regard for that and how I, as best I can, bring this place together. And I'm just saying to you, my feeling is, if we went straight for that second vote, it would and could cause tensions on our streets. It could divide the communities in ways that could cause quite profound damage. But I'm saying to you that that social damage is still, if we're given those 2 final options of people's vote or no deal, I would still say people's vote to stop the sure damage to families, businesses, communities that comes with no deal. But I think, I'm watching it very carefully, as I'm sure many people are. I still felt that the interest lay in sort of trying to get a good deal that moves us forward and keeps our relations with Europe. I do think that the negotiations were mishandled from the very off, and we've been left in a really, really bad place as a country. And everybody, you deserve better, everybody deserves better.
If we go to the back.
I'm kind of intrigued by the fact that the far right's been thrown into this conversation, because the far right in Britain this is not Italy, this is not Hungary, this is not Poland. The far right in Britain is smaller and more fragmented than it has been since I was 14 and we had the National Front on the streets. They are not a major force. They're loud and they're annoying, but we had the EDL here 3 weeks ago. There was fewer than 50 of them in town. They were outnumbered, probably about 20 to 1, by officers from Greater Manchester Police and North Wales Police. So I don't think we should, because they get press coverage, much to my dismay, and given this oxygen, I don't think we should throw that into the debate and just say because these people are loud and bully and whatever, that we should listen to them, as opposed to most people who, whichever side of the debate they're on, are not like that. And I take your point about division, but the idea that if we don't give some kind of Brexit, that the people who voted Leave, which were largely in post-industrial towns that feel they've been left behind by our politicians and are quite right in that.
Yeah,
I don't think when we deliver a Brexit that doesn't make their life better, they're going to say, oh, brilliant, though, we've got a blue passport. They're going to be more angry. So all we're doing is kicking that division down the road. And actually, because our politicians in Parliament can't agree on this, it should be down to us, because only we can break this impasse. Only by giving us back that vote can we break that impasse. And whatever you say about the polling, it's not one poll that's saying that sentiment has changed. It's a whole series of polls, many of them using the same data it was used to correctly call the original referendum and the 2007 thing. So, again, the polling is all showing that sentiment is moving. And finally, for the last question, you said, I'm going to go to the government and demand this investment for Northern Powerhouse Transport, when every Brexit scenario says that we're going to lose economic growth. So where's the investment money going to come from? We won't have it in a post-Brexit scenario. So I think we need more realism and more guts from our politicians to actually say we need to find a way out of this now. Because all we've got now is politicians who are scared of upsetting one particular voting group instead of saying this is bad for our country and we should stop it.
No, I don't agree with you. You've got politicians who respect democracy. And so, no, I'm sorry, but there was here, you may not like it, but hear it. You've got politicians who are saying you cannot just say to those people, you're saying they'll get angry. I'll tell you what will really make them angry, if it looks like the political class are saying, oh, well, sorry, but we're just rerunning this. That will make them angry. And you say that the far right's not an issue. Well, I'm afraid it is. The police will say that the threat from far-right groups is rising all of the time, and that would come from security services nationally. And look back at what happened with hate crime through the referendum. Please don't diminish that as not an issue. It is an issue. There was a significant rise in hate crime through that period. So there is an issue of safety on streets. There is. And those are real things that people like me, politicians, have to think about. Now, I appreciate where you're coming from, and I voted the same way that you did, probably. But you kind of have to, at some point, say, this country has to come back together again. And just saying that, you know, I don't know what but to go to another vote doesn't bring the country back together again, in my view. But as I'm saying, if it's a no deal scenario, another vote is then in those circumstances is what we go to. So the difference between us is you want one now, and I'm saying we have one if we just can't get agreement about a sensible deal on which we take the country forward. So it's not a massive difference, but it is a difference.
Yep. This lady here.
Hello, I would like to make a suggestion perhaps how you could bring people together. You sort of say that people who now want another vote are sort of not Democrats. Now, I would like another vote as soon as possible, and I do not think that I'm not a Democrat. If you look at countries that are sort of democracies like with a lot of referendums, like for instance Switzerland, it happens all the time that they have a referendum and then it gets sort of Parliament tries to deal with it and Parliament may or may not achieve to do what the people wanted in the referendum. And if it is not possible to do because Parliament just can't find a majority to do it, then it does not happen, and that is perfectly democratic. The other point I would like to make is quite often sort of people who demand another vote are sort of told that we sort of think that Leave voters were stupid. Now, I would say sort of there's a German proverb that is, he who asks a stupid question gets a stupid answer, and that is the problem. And I think now, what you need to do now, it's the time to eat a little bit of humble pie. The people were taken for granted in the first referendum because Cameron thought that it was a done thing that everybody would vote to remain. And that was the stupid question. And all the parties who voted to have that referendum made a massive mistake. And if you now sort of all those parties who voted for that, if you say, look, that was a mistake, and we can't actually cobble anything together in Parliament that would make anybody happy, then I think that is perhaps a way so that people will understand why you actually go to all the trouble of having another referendum.
I definitely hear what you're saying, and I'm not saying I'm completely against another referendum. What I am saying, though, the experience of being up in Scotland through the Scottish referendum, and then a couple of years later with the European referendum, I don't think they're a great way to run a country like Switzerland seems to think they are. Honestly, I don't. I think we're a different system here. We're a parliamentary democracy, and that is our system. And running things through referenda, I think, leads you to quite a fragmented place and quite a divided place. So my experience of this is go back to sort of, we kind of learned this in the 70s and then unlearned it, didn't we? That referenda can cause quite a lot of problems. And I'm kind of in that place, I'm afraid. I would give them in exceptional circumstances, as I'm trying to say to you all tonight, rather than kind of giving them almost all the time. I think it is exceptional, and I keep saying to everybody, one might be needed to get us out of this hole that the country finds itself in. So I'm not necessarily ruling it out, but I.
Saying it's unsellable and you can't convince people.
No.
As far as I can see, I think just more effort needs to be made.
I think, from my point of view, I'm not in Parliament, and I'm allowing Parliament a chance to try and solve this. I don't think it's doing a particularly good job of it, which is an understatement. But it's its job at the moment to try and solve this issue. And if it doesn't, and we then are at that cliff edge of no deal, then I will support a second referendum, definitely. And I'll be out there very quickly making the case for it, because we cannot go into a situation where minus 9.4% on our economy, the police not knowing whether they can cooperate with other police forces around Europe, Manchester Airport not knowing what it can do in terms of flight paths. We can't go there. So I am saying to you, in those circumstances, I am right there. But right now, I don't think it would help to go straight. It's got to be a second referendum. You've got to let the parliamentary process try go through this and try and resolve it.
Yep.
The deal we've got.
Sorry,
The deal we've got is the deal we've got. It's not going to be renegotiated. I think people living in Cuckoo Land, if they think there's going to be any renegotiation. So it's either we accept this deal or we come out without anything. But isn't there a third option? That if Parliament lose this vote next week or whenever it is, they could just ignore it altogether and go back into Europe. Just remain in Europe. This is what this lady was saying.
I don't think that's an option either, though, because it's triggered Article 50, and there's a lot of people saying that. Well, no, because it's a two-way street, isn't it? You know, there's Europe have a view on that because obviously our membership expires soon. So we could ask Europe to extend Article 50, and I think that is a sensible move, to be honest with you.
Well, if you just rip Article 50 up and
There is a court case in Luxembourg now.
Oh, well, right. Well, I didn't think we could just rip it up ourselves. I thought we'd have to do it in agreement.
It will be decided whether you can do it unilaterally or not, but we will have the decision before the vote.
But after all, Parliament is supreme. Ultimately, not the people, aren't they? We vote people into Parliament to act on our behalf, so they are supreme. And a referendum is mob rule. I think it's an awful way to run a country, personally.
I think legally, as I understand it, obviously we'll wait for that court case, but I don't think Parliament can just unilaterally back out of Article 50. It would need agreement from the European Union at the moment, because obviously we're still under European law, so that would be needed. Yeah.
The person who wrote Article 50, Lord Kerr, thinks you can. He wrote it and he thinks you can, and it is being, as this lady said, it is in court at the moment. So the assumption should be that we can actually revoke it until proved otherwise.
My preference would be definitely extend it and seek an agreement with Europe to extend it, because the cliff edge of getting closer to March the 29th without knowing where we're going is dangerous, definitely. So I wouldn't be against, you know, whether unilaterally, bilaterally. I think prefer it to be bilateral, to be honest. But I mean, I think extending it would be definitely an option.
Just to clarify, there's a court case at the moment. It's gone to Luxembourg. The government have tried to stop us approaching Europe so that we can agree that it can be torn up or withdrawn. So the government have tried to stop that. Now that's just been rejected by the Supreme Court and the European Court. So that should be a go, and we should get a result before Christmas. We should get an announcement before Christmas.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for that explanation. I didn't know that. Thank you. So, lady.
Yes.
One of my concerns is I'm a social worker, I work in social care, and clearly to me there's a big impact across the whole of Greater Manchester in a range of sectors about the loss of EU citizens who no longer are able to stay or worried about whether they can stay or have to pay to have less rights than they've got at the moment. I'm just wondering what your view is about the impact of that, because clearly that's a huge issue for Greater Manchester, the hospitality sector, the care sector, education, higher education. What's your view about that?
Well, we've mapped that. You're absolutely right. You know, there's a large number of European Union nationals working in various sectors. I think care is actually the biggest. Not necessarily the NHS, there's a lot in the NHS, but I think domiciliary care is actually the biggest sector. So you're absolutely right. It's a major issue for our economy, as well as the trading arrangements and the customs arrangements. The human capital effects of the decision are huge as well, and that affects my wife. She's Dutch national. She feels, you know, kind of, I don't know what's the word, sort of unwell. Yeah, not quite that, but just sort of as though discarded a little. You know, that kind of been here, bringing up a family, contributing to the country. It's sort of, you know, forgotten really, and that doesn't count for anything. I was Shadow Home Secretary straight after the referendum, and I called a vote in Parliament on the Wednesday after the referendum, asking the government to give immediate leave to remain to the EU nationals who were here, because they had come here and made it their home and contributed. And I think it's really bad that we've left that cloud hanging all this time. And that's one of the ways in which I think we have mishandled the negotiations. We should have built a bridge straight away and said to all the countries of Europe, we appreciate the fact that people from your countries are helping us build ours, and we are going to show we are grateful for that by immediately saying anybody who came before the referendum result is welcome to stay here. And that's a real missed opportunity that wasn't done, and I'm afraid that was the then Home Secretary, now Prime Minister, who took that decision.
But what can you do as a Greater Manchester Mayor?
We just hang on.
Some of the consequences of that, because there is a pilot scheme as settled status, but most people can't apply unless they're in the pilot. So people are leaving, and the impact. I mean, what do you feel as what's your influence really to try and address some of that?
Well, I was meeting a cabinet minister just this afternoon and made that point to him about the effect of the immigration white paper that's coming. So I think it's coming next week. And we're hearing that it isn't going to be favourable enough, and it's going to put, I think, a cap on what people have to earn, before they can come to work here. So, below 30,000, you wouldn't be able to come. Now, in London, that's probably okay because the wages are beyond that and they'll still carry on getting everybody they want. But here, that would have a very real effect on our economy. So the skilled workforce we will continue to need, we will struggle to bring to Greater Manchester. So both on the EU nationals we might lose and the restrictions we might then face to bringing people in could have a very detrimental effect. And all I can say to you is we've made those arguments directly to the government. And we've got to get ourselves back in the position of being a welcoming country that sends out a really strong message that the people who made this their home and the people who want to make it their home are welcome here.
Sorry, the thing is, like, so if you just say all the EU nationals are welcome here, I do agree with that. But I feel you can't just say that straight away, because if you say that straight away, what about the EU? Because they haven't really said anything about the British nationals in the EU countries. So it's kind of like, I feel if they ever do say something, both of them need to say something together.
Well, I take the point, and that was Theresa May's argument when we were debating this just after the referendum. But maybe this is a controversial view, but it is my view. Why are we prioritising British citizens who decided to leave this country and go and make their life somewhere else over people who decided to come here, are bringing up their children here, are contributing to our taxes here? Why have we kind of said that someone who's gone and lived somewhere else is more important than someone who's actually here and working in our public services and paying our taxes? I kind of found that argument not persuasive, to be honest with you. And I think we should have just said, unilaterally, give people leave to stay here, because they'd come here out with all, we invited them here through being a member of the European Union, and we should have done the right thing by them, I think, as the lady was saying.
Can you just wait for the microphone?
My other situation is my partner is French. So the reality is that a lot of people have got lives spread across two EU countries. We're still in the EU. We can't pretend that you can't fix people in one place. I'm planning to go and live in France, but does that mean my rights as a British citizen aren't important either? I think it's about everybody's rights. And it really worries me to hear that some people's rights are prioritised above others.
No, what I was saying was, I'm not saying that they're not important, but any government has to think first about the people living here in our country day to day. That is our primary focus, because we're running this country where people are actually living. I believed that if we'd have made that gesture just after the referendum, it would have built goodwill towards British citizens living overseas, and we would have probably got a better deal for them because of that move that we'd taken. So I'm not saying that it's not important. They are important and always will be important. But I didn't see how you were saying that the interest of somebody who's chosen not to live here anymore is more important than somebody who was living here. Well, I kind of feel any government's first got to deal with people who are actually living here. Once you leave the country, you are living under someone else's rule, aren't you? when you're living in our country, you're living under our system. And I just kind of felt that is the reality. You can't, personally, you may disagree, I don't see why British expats should vote in general elections, personally, because they're not living here.
Just because you don't live in the country does not mean that you're not perhaps doing a bloody good service for this country. You have no idea why people are there, what they're doing, whether they're teaching English or have businesses or do things. I mean, it's something.
I was away for 17 years, and I think I did a good service
can you just...
country. Working for the British Council, I don't think it's fair. A lot of my friends are in this situation where they live abroad and are having to negotiate across Europe their right to stay in the country that they're living in. So I find it upsetting because it does hit a kind of personal note with friends and things like that.
I mean, all I'm saying is that when you're out away from this country and paying a different tax rate in a different country, you know, I don't personally think you still get the right to vote there and vote here in terms of... Well, yeah, one second. I'm just... Because you can in other elections. So in case of my wife, who does and has lived here for 30 years, can't vote in never been able to vote in a general election, you know, why don't we... I don't know. I don't think we've got that right, in my view. Why is somebody who isn't living here able to affect the policies of people who are living here, but people who are living here don't get that, who are paying taxes? And bear in mind, the old adage is, no taxation without representation.
But I've come back, and now I'm in this mess.
You get your vote back.
I should have had it before.
Well, it's a difference of opinion. You're entitled to think that. But I don't personally believe if you're living in a different country, paying a different tax rate, under different policies, you still get the right to vote in a British general election to affect decisions when you're not there to... You know.
Europe, you pay your pension, and it's across Europe. You know, it's all transferable. So
well, it's maybe a difference of view, but that is just my maybe, as I said, controversial view. But that's the one I've got.
Okay, we're going to move on from that. Can I just remind you, if you have got a question, if you please wait for the microphone so we can pick it up on the live stream. So bringing it back to Greater Manchester, and we're going to talk about council tax. Yes, so Rosemary, if you want to take it away.
My friends just bought a house in Chalkham Hardy, which is in Greater Manchester.
Yep.
And the house that they paid for is £360,000. And their council band is Band C. And they pay £1,392.69 per year. Here in Bury, a council tax band C house is sadly nowhere near the value of £360,000. And yet, and I'm not being rude to people in Bury because I live here myself, we charge £1,554.55. As Greater Manchester Mayor, money needs to be raised from all boroughs. What steps are you going to make to ensure fairness and equity to Bury residents who get a very poor support from central government funding? That's my question.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I'm definitely in agreement with this one now after some difficult questions before. We've got the leader of the council here as well, who I think would also, Councillor Rishi Shori.
That's my personal question, it's nothing to do with, I'm not representing any council. Too late.
Yeah. The problem with the system that you're describing is that it hasn't been updated for decades. And it's the unfairest system going. And the worst thing about it is the government at the moment are increasingly not funding things properly from a national level and letting more money having to be raised from council tax to pay for social care, because they're not funding social care, and so councils are, like Rishi and others, are having to go on that unfair council tax base to raise money for that. We've got more money for Greater Manchester Police having to be raised locally. And that then exacerbates the unfairness, because obviously if it's done nationally through income tax, I mean, people might have their views about that too, but at least it's a modicum of greater fairness in that. So we're in a really bad situation where things are not being funded properly nationally. I mean, the two big ones I would say are social care and policing, but there are others as well. And as a result, this unfair system is having to carry more burden of taxation, and therefore the unfairness increases all of the time. So you're absolutely right with your question, and we would fully agree with it.
You're not answering the question, though. What are you going to do?
No, sorry. Well, we do something, we do something about it. So let's take the police element, for which I'm responsible. So maybe Rishi would want to come in and say something about, the councils are repeatedly challenging the government on this at the moment in terms of the local government funding settlement. From my point of view, I'm working with other police and crime commissioners around the country to say the way in which they're not funding the police just cannot carry on. The Deputy Mayor here for Policing and Crime, and she's made this argument repeatedly too. In Greater Manchester Police raises about a quarter of its budget through the council tax. I think I've got this right. So the vast majority comes from government grant, because our council tax base isn't the same as some of those wealthier parts of the country. So we can't raise as much money from our council tax base. So if the government stops funding nationally, we are really hit by that. And that's the argument that all the big cities have made. Sadiq Khan has made, I've made, Beverly Hughes has made, police and crime commissioners all around the country. And we're about to get the next police settlement next week. And the rumours we're picking up again are it will be council tax funded. And it's even worse this time because there's a hole in the police pension fund because of a failure of the Treasury to fund. They've changed the actuarial sort of calculations, and there's now a hole in the police. So we're going to have to raise council tax, it might seem, to cover a pension deficit. So there'll be no service to the public. It really can't carry on. Police cuts have gone way too far.
I'm going to push this one again. I'm really sorry, but I am going to push this
Well,
again.
we challenge the government all the time.
No, what my point was that you've got one borough in Greater Manchester where the rateable value of a house can be double another one, yet they're getting more support from central government and paying less. You're Mayor of Greater Manchester. Is there going to be equity and fairness across the borough? Because it's £360,000 worth of house on a Band C.
It needs revaluation, is what it
Band
needs.
C in Bury. That's not fair for the residents of Bury. I'm sorry, I am going to push you. I understand the police funding, I understand where it comes from, but you've not answered my question.
It's not in my gift. I was only saying that we challenge the government on it. It requires revaluation across the country. Yes. And that case has been made by many people, including myself, over many years. And I support revaluation. I actually support major reform of council tax. It's a very unfair, regressive tax, and it's not geographically fair, as you say. Rishi, I don't know if you want to...
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Got there in the end. It's been a long day.
Hello. Yeah. Hi, Rosemary. Not only your local councillor as well, so it's good. I think the fundamental point, however, we know that council tax is regressive, but actually it's the fundamental system of local government finance. So under something called the Barnett formula, you get more funding from government the more deprived you are. Yeah. Well, Bury isn't perceived as a deprived area. Well, no, absolutely. But fundamentally, if you take the impacts of austerity and so on and so forth, we actually lose out significantly from central government grants. So it's not just about revaluation, that's a key part, but it's a fundamental rethink about how local government is financed in its total. And actually, we've lost £92 million worth of funding to date. If we didn't have that support from council tax, so many precious services, including services you work for, I don't know what we would do. So we're in a very difficult position. And I know Andy's advocating for a better system. We are as a local government family, but apparently austerity is over. Hopefully we'll see.
So I read some time ago.
Hopefully
but
we'll
also,
see
don't forget, we've got shire councils going bust. So the crisis in local government isn't sort of threatened, it's happening. And if the government just carries on ignoring it and treating councils as the lowest priority when it comes to funding it, we really are going to be in a bad place as a country. So we are making the case, and it requires. Yeah, we do. We do. You're right. There's another issue behind that. I'll just jump in on that point. the way, it goes back to the question on transport, the way funding is given out in this country from the Treasury is basically done on an economic test, i.e. who's got the biggest claim on it. And it's the areas that generate the most in terms of the economy. So the way Treasury gives out money is they give more to the areas that already have the most. So the reason why transport spending keeps getting sucked into London and the South East is because there's an economic test applied to UK government funding. And the reason why the European point is important is because they never did that. They always applied a social case to infrastructure investment. And it meant that Liverpool, Greater Manchester, got money that the UK government wasn't giving them, but then the UK government had to match because Europe had decided to give them money. So there was a really important point about European funding that shouldn't be missed if we are going to Brexit.
Okay. Do we have Anne Kerrigan here?
Yes.
Anne? No? Okay. Well, I'm going to ask her a question. Will you support care staff who work with vulnerable adults with learning disabilities from losing their top-up payments for doing sleep-ins? The sudden removal of top-ups still being paid for by local authorities has left some staff destitute.
I certainly do support them, and I was really disappointed when the court case was lost recently. For those who don't know, people who work in residential care, so staff who are there and then do night shifts and spend the night then in the place where they are looking after people, they lost a court case recently that said that when they're sleeping, i.e. when they're there but they're not necessarily working to support people, but they're there in case they're needed in an emergency, that can't be treated as work. And effectively the companies that run these places then use that and have cut what used to be called their top-up payments in respect of when they were sleeping over. And I don't think it's right, because when you're not at home with your family, you are at work, aren't you? And it doesn't mean you're always active and attending to what you're doing. You're there because you might be needed. And, that would be true of colleagues in the fire service. They're not always out doing everything, but that, when you're needed, and that's why you're there and not with your family. And you should be paid for that. So Greater Manchester councils have put enough money in the budget to continue the payment, but some companies are not honouring that payment. So I've recently supported Unison in the campaign against some of those companies because I personally believe that those top-up payments should be paid.
Yeah, because a lot of care staff won't be very well paid at all.
No, they're not. And this is the sad thing, isn't it, about the way care has gone in this country? And it goes back, actually, to the last question. The local government kind of funding base has been chipped away at, and the losers of that are people who need care, and also the people who are the carers. And the idea that in this day and age, we're still caring for people on the basis of 15-minute visits by staff on 0 hours contracts who don't even get the minimum wage because they don't get the travel time between the 15-minute visits that they do. The idea that gives good care, and it's the kind of care that we would all want for people in our families, it's just never going to happen, is it? And this is what's got to change in this country. We've got to get back to being fair when it comes to the jobs that people do. And this whole drive towards outsourcing and cutting everything down and casual work and 0 hours, it is not building a stronger society. I'm doing a lot of work on rough sleeping and homelessness at the moment, as you might know. And I think that is a product of a society that isn't giving people basic security in terms of their working life, that is kind of cutting back all of these things and is leaving people living week to week, not knowing if they're going to earn enough to feed their kids and pay for their school uniform. And too many people are on that edge. And we've got to sort of take a stand against it. I'm really pleased that a lot of our councils are becoming living wage employers. Greater Manchester Police this year became an accredited living wage employer. Greater Manchester Combined Authority is now one. We've got to stop this trend to say that those at the lowest end of the labour market can just have everything cut away from them. I just think it's really, really wrong. And when I took the decision to donate some of my salary to homelessness, I was trying to send a signal that I think the pay at the top of organisations, public and private, by the way, not just private, has got way out of kilter with what is done for people at the very bottom of organisations. You know, we need to get back to a kind of more cohesive approach to things where, you know, there isn't such a massive differential from those at the bottom and those at the top. I mean, that housing executive recently, what was this bonus? £75 million? How on earth can that be justified? And this rail industry that I've been dealing with this year, you know, they're not performing for anybody yet. They're on six-figure salaries, massive six-figure salaries. It's all wrong, it seems to me, in terms of the way, the value that society is placing on work. And we need a system of taxation and payment that recognises the value in the work that people do. And people who are spending their lives looking after people with learning disabilities and spending their nights looking after people with learning disabilities deserve a lot better and fairer treatment than they're getting.
This gentleman.
All right.
Talk about disability. My daughter's disabled, she's Downs. She's got a bit of a December job working at the markets in town. It's great when she gets a wage packet. But other than that, she's had one job, which was about half a day a week. The employment rate amongst disabled adults is about 97%. So I'll ask you to think about this. I won't never put you on the spot. But when you talk about civil lives and going back to old ways, a long time ago we had something called Remploy, where basically the state stepped in and said, we're going to give people dignity, we're going to give them a wage. And that was not just people with learning difficulties, people with physical disabilities, sorry. Now, I stood on a picket line in Preston when they closed the one there. And some of them people have been there 30 years, they got married there, they worked together. And actually, the sick record was unbelievable. For disabled people, I think the sick record was about 2%. So I'd ask you, it would be great in the future if our mayor could set something up like Mankploy, where what they said to these people in barber coats and jumpers and saying, oh, we really must get them out of the real world. It doesn't work. It'd be great if we could step in as councils and say, we're going to set something up similar to Remploy to get give them the dignity of work, the dignity of wage. Thanks, Andy.
Well said. Well, you can tell by the reaction you've said it better than anything I could say. You've said it really powerfully. You're right. For those who didn't catch that statistic, it's worth just repeating. 3% of adults with learning disabilities in Greater Manchester are in employment. 3%. And it's not much higher for adults with autism, where all the evidence says that with the right support and in the right job, a much higher number of people could be in work. I mean, there are some employers doing the right thing, but it's way too low. So I'll take on board the suggestion. We've made a commitment in our learning disability strategy, which was actually co-written by people with learning disabilities, to increase that shamefully low figure of 3%. And I'm open-minded, to be honest, Alan, about the solutions that might help us to do that. I think you could look at a solution, again, of the kind that you described, or more supported apprenticeships. There's lots of ways in which it could be done, or perhaps more public bodies offering supported roles. There's ways of doing it, and you're right, it's a scandalous figure.
Yep.
There is a way of doing it by supporting businesses that sign up to disability confident pledges. There are a lot of businesses now that are coming over. So I've just spent 5 years working on an employability programme, and you know, people talk about job carving, job spec. It's been a difficult time for employers, I appreciate that, but there isn't enough in the way of placements and businesses actually doing what they say they're going to do with placements, which is part of the Disability Confident Pledge.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in the process at the moment of developing what we call a Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter, which is intended to be a kind of a set of principles that what we would say the best employers or the good employers should sign up to. So some of those things will be on things that affect everybody, like living wage or getting rid of 0 hours contracts where people don't want to sign up to one. But another side of it might be organisations that sign up to that pledge around giving everybody the opportunity to work. And you say giving more support to those employers. I have it in my mind, and this might be a benefit of Brexit, sorry to inflame some of the pro-Europeans in the audience, but one benefit might be that we do get more ability to direct public procurement, so that we only allow public procurement, so not the kind of, you know, this level playing field state aid thing, but we say that you've got to be a GM good employer if you're going to benefit from public procurement. And that's something that I'm looking at to see if we can derive a much better culture in the workplace where we have higher standards, where all people are treated fairly, respectfully, and are supported into work. So yeah, I think the point you've raised is a really strong one.
Yeah.
This is going to go back on one. You were talking about before about your wage, but when it was, I think it was like 15%, is it? Yeah, it goes to homelessness. You said that you're going to tackle homelessness and get rid of it all by 2020. Are you going to, get rid of it by 2020? Because there was my mate and he was homeless and he had some problems and stuff, but he went to the homeless charity and they said to him he's not a priority. He was 16, and so if you're 16 years old, it's not a priority, and all the hostels are full. What's going to happen to people like them?
Yeah.
Because there's plenty more people like him.
I didn't say I'd end homelessness by 2020 because there is an important distinction here. I said I would end rough sleeping across Greater Manchester. Which is still ambitious, I give you, but it's not quite the same as ending homelessness, because I can't necessarily give everybody a home. What I can try and do is give everybody somewhere to go every night that's warm, that's safe. And as I sit here tonight, I'm confident that we're going to do it. We've just launched across Greater Manchester a scheme called A Bed Every Night. I'm really pleased and grateful to Rishi for ensuring that Bury Council has been a part of it. So what we're doing is, even though we don't have all the public money we need, going back to the local government funding thing, we are raising money privately to support the councils in this. But from the 1st of November, we've started on a scheme where we are trying to give everybody a bed every night. Now, it's not enough beds in every borough because we can't always necessarily know how many people are out there sleeping rough, and sadly, Universal Credit is increasing the numbers of people sleeping rough. However, as of last weekend, we had 180 people who were previously out on the street just 3 weeks ago in a bed every night accommodation, and we've got 104 of those people have moved from that accommodation into a home. So it's a massive change in the way that we're doing things, and we're going to open some new shelters in Manchester in the next week or so. We're confident in the next few weeks that we're going to have enough places to give everybody a bed every night. Of course, not everybody will want to go in because there are many reasons why the beds that we're offering might not be right for some people. There's a difficult issue around pets and dogs. Some people don't want to be parted from their dog when they go inside. And so we're trying to invest in dog pods, as we call them, so that people can take their pets into. But not every bed has a dog pod with it. So, there are issues why some people still won't come inside. But this is a massive change. And I'm hoping to make a bed every night permanent if I can find the funding to do it. Because I believe here, as I was going back to what I was just saying, we are wealthy enough to put a roof over every head every night of the week. And I am just determined that we are the first place to say that we are going to do that, and we're going to do it every single night. And it goes back to what I was saying about the differentials in society. I'm as in favour as anybody getting on and being a success in life, but I don't believe in a society that says for some people to succeed in life, other people have to sleep in doorways. I don't believe in that.
Can you tell me the percentage of extra?
Could you just ask
Yep,
that again?
sure. Yep.
Sorry, go on.
I'm saying, can you tell us the percentage of ex-military on the streets, homeless?
It's hard, Paul, to give a direct percentage because it's obviously it's a situation that fluctuates. I do a walk around the city centre every 3 months, and I have met so many members of the military. I would say you're looking at no more than 10%, but somewhere between 5 and 10%. Now, I'm kind of a little bit taking a figure out of the air, but I've met so many that I think it would be somewhere in that space. And I just think, the whole issue, as I was saying, is a scandal. But somebody who served this country overseas And what must they think when they are there on that street in the cold? What must go through their mind when they've been out there serving this country, and there they are, sort of left to sit in a street when they get back home? I mean, that, from my point of view, should be a never event. So the Mayor's Homelessness Fund gave some money to Broughton House, specifically to work to eradicate homelessness amongst ex-forces. I think more than just a bed every night, they should be given a home, to be honest with you. And that is basically what the Armed Forces Covenant says. And we're pretty committed to delivering the Armed Forces Covenant in Greater Manchester. And for me, that should mean a home. It's quite frankly a scandal, isn't it, that anybody who served this country should ever find themselves without anywhere to go.
Sticking with the issue of homelessness, we've got a question from Sam Butt, who's not here tonight, but basically saying, we're an outreach org, a registered charity working at grassroots levels with homeless people. Rather than working against us, work with us. What would you say to that?
Well, I'm just surprised that I don't fully know why that question has come in the way that it has, because we've created the Greater Manchester Homelessness Action Network that is open to all organisations, voluntary, charitable, faith in Greater Manchester, who are working to support homeless people to get involved. The only thing I can think is whether or not they're doing work that we might think isn't necessarily the best way of tackling the issue. So there are some organisations that hand out food and clothes on the street, and there is a kind of school of thought that says that that can sustain people on the street as opposed to helping them make the journey away from the street into a more supported place. Now, I don't know if that's the case, but it could be the case that there's a sort of difference of perspective about how you best support homeless people. Our view is really clear. A bed every night is the way to go. You know, sustaining people on the street will mean that they're not going to be able to move forward. It's a simple thing though, isn't it? When your basic needs are being met, you're warm, you're fed, you're clean, I think you can then think about moving forward from where you are. If your basic needs aren't being met because you're out on the street, I don't think you can move forward and address some of the other issues that you have in life. So our view is, give people somewhere to go, stabilise them, support them, and then help them move forward. And sometimes this is where the difficult issue about on-street giving comes up. I do it myself sometimes. You go past somebody, you can't help, you give some money. A lot of people who are experts in the sector will say that's not necessarily the best thing to do, because it can sometimes, or it can be people who are preying on homeless people on the streets can obviously then use that money. And there was a spice dealer arrested in Manchester not long ago with £900 on them in pound coins, and the judge said that is the money of the good people of Manchester, and it's been given with good intent, and it's ended up in the hands of people without good intent for those people who are sometimes really working on them to take some of that stuff. So I think that GMP would do share that view that we need. Until we had a bed every night, I couldn't give a clear message to the public about not giving on the street, because they might have come back to me and said, well, hang on a minute, you're not doing enough for them, so someone's got to help them. And that would be a legitimate response. But now we can begin to say there is somewhere for everybody to go. I think we can sort of be clearer in saying, look, don't necessarily give on the street. Mm-hmm. Do give to the organisations that are providing a bed every night and all the add-on support, because that in the end is a much better way of helping people make that journey to a better life.
Hi, Andy. I'm a resident of Bury, and it's just coincidental that I know Sam that sent a message in. She told me on live streams. Hi, Sam. And I volunteer with the organisation, and she roughly worded to the effect that it started with the council tweeting to some effect that outreach groups encourage drug dealers. Now, they provide Myriad Foundation specifically, and there's a load of others. There's a plethora of groups that do this in Manchester City Centre, and they provide relief to the people that are rough sleeping, whether it's through food or a big part of it is signposting as well to various services, because people are sleeping for various reasons, whether it's, you know, situations through mental health or things that have happened in family or whatever, or work, and all these kind of things. And to say that it's kind of negative, or it's not helping the situation, or it's even making it worse, or it's driving a dependency, I think that's kind of not really giving the right answer, or recognising the work that's being done. Because like I said, there's signposting, there's, you know, we have Centrepoint, which you might be familiar with, in the centre of Manchester on Oldham Street. And some people, you know, whether it's getting a bed or access to showers, they're worried about some of their belongings that they keep on the street. Are they going to be stolen? Drug dealers actually getting into, and we do know they are getting into some of these shelters as well, try and push spice and all these kind of issues. So there are various reasons why people might not access the services, but I think it's a bit unfair to be kind of, I'm not going to say the word attack, but, you know, mislabel work that outreach works do.
No, I wasn't doing that, because I didn't know what lay behind the question, because it was just a general question, why are we working against you? So I was trying to kind of guess where that was coming from. I don't know anything about the work that's done, so I'm not making a sort of judgment on the organisation behind this question. All I was saying was, you know, we would prioritise, we're not necessarily working against you, but we would prioritise support that is done through that structured environment that is about trying to help people move away from the street rather than necessarily sustain people on the street. That is what we would say. However, I would be the first to say to you that there has been a need to help people on the street when we didn't have enough a bed every night accommodation with clothes, with sleeping bags. You know, so I'm not necessarily working against you or in any way denigrating the work. I'm not doing that. But I am just saying the drift of the journey in Greater Manchester is more towards getting people inside, maximising the spending on helping them deal with some of the issues they may have, move forward. And if we're just giving stuff out on the street, it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. It's just a temporary solution, not a proper long-term solution.
And I agree there. I think there needs to be a structured approach centrally from the council or GMCA for the longer term view, but what can the council do to support the immediate relief work that these charities and organisations are doing?
Well, what I would say is, and I don't want to leave this discussion tonight thinking that I'm in any way sort of, you know, criticising the work that's being done, because there's obviously a lot of volunteers giving a lot of time who are helping a lot of people, and it's different obviously giving food than giving money. You know, that's a different thing, of course it is. So what I would say is I'd be happy to meet them and discuss, you know, what is being done, how it could be more maybe knitted in with a bed every night, because if it's about giving people a bit of food and then saying, can we refer you to this place, then I think that's then knitting in with this sort of strategy that we're trying to develop with the voluntary organisations. So the way we'll crack this issue is not if everyone's out doing different things, it's about everyone trying to pull behind the same drive and the same strategy. So that for me is the way to do it. So come and, I'd say to the organisation, if you know them, and to Sam, wherever Sam is listening, come and I will meet you. Let's sit down and have a chat. Let's thank you for everything that you are doing to help homeless people, but then let's see if we can knit you in a bit more to the GM strategy, so hopefully we're all achieving more together.
Anyone else? Any questions around homelessness?
I've just spent a few nights.
Just hang on a minute.
Okay, I'll be interested to hear what you say about it. Go ahead, and if you want to ask it as well after.
Yeah, I recently became homeless.
Right.
I had to leave the place I was living at because it became intolerable. But I spent a few nights in Oldham, the night shelter. I think it's a great idea that you provide that, you know, bed every night, because I don't know where I would have been if I didn't have somewhere to go. I probably would have been back in jail or something. But the important thing is that you give them support while they're there, because I believe they're only there for a short period of time. And it's important that you give them support while they're there to move on. Because if you stay there and then you end up back on the streets, it's just, there's no point really, is there? It's counterproductive. And as for the guys that stay there, they are really desperate and they have no option but to go and beg on the streets because they don't receive enough benefits to do anything and they're in no position to get a job. So as for begging on the streets, I'll give every time to beggars on the streets because I don't see any harm in that at all, to be honest.
No, you know, and a lot of people feel the same, and I give on the street as well. So I'm not going to claim that I don't, you know, I have a hard and fast rule. I try to.
So do you give beggars money?
Yeah, occasionally. Yeah. But I do it, you know. It just, you know, I don't know. You know, like everybody. Sometimes I do. It depends if I've got talking to them. It just depends. But I do donate the money from my salary to the Mayor's Fund, which helps fund a bed every night. And I'm really pleased with what you said, by the way, because that's exactly what it's for. I want a place that catches people if they fall, right? So we don't just let people fall all the way down to the street and then get all of the issues that come from being out on the street. One night out on the street is enough to damage your mental health, isn't it? You know, because being out there like that, you know, everybody will be scarred by an experience like that. And if you're out multiple nights, well, you know, that the damage just keeps multiplying. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to do. And we want people to be in there with support. And we want them to be then helped towards a home, get them back on the benefit system, you know, get them back into a stable situation. That's the whole idea. But a bed every night isn't perfect. You know, we know that. We're kind of building it at the moment. You know, we're trying to make it as good as we can. And it's a really difficult issue, this, about this begging on the street. I'm not saying it's a hard and fast rule. And I'm not saying to organisations, don't go out and help people on the street, you know, because the organisation we were just hearing about clearly are doing good work. But what I am saying is, let's try and build an infrastructure that's more about helping people away from the street, rather than just giving stuff to them on the street and then just walking past and feeling like it's job done, because it's not job done, as you know. So, no, I think you've made a really.
The place I stayed at, it was okay. There was a lot of support there. The place was very friendly, very welcoming, and the lads just got on with each other. You know?
Great. Well, I'm really pleased to hear that. That's fantastic.
You felt like you belonged to something, and you weren't out there by yourself.
Great.
Just for that small period, that overnight stay.
Good luck to you. Thank you.
And for our final question, if we go to this young man here.
Hello. I live in Hindley Green, near Wigan, but the fact over the last 3 years, we've had so many cuts to the bus service, through like withdrawing the daytime service to Manchester. But now that the TFM funded service between Manchester and Wigan, going through Hindley, is now being cut just as they open the new bus station. Why is Wigan now the largest town in Greater Manchester not to have a service to the city centre?
So I know the area well, because I used to be the MP for Hindley Green, going back a few years. Obviously, Lee is not far away, and Lee does have a really good service now to the city centre through the League guided busway. But I appreciate that's not Hindley Green, but obviously it's not far away. But the bigger issue is the way buses have been run in Greater Manchester for 30 years. Now, that's not a comment on TFGM or indeed any council. Back in the 1980s, the buses were deregulated. What that meant was the bus companies could basically do what they wanted to do, go where they wanted to go, charge what they wanted to charge. And we've lived with this system for 30 years. And it's an understatement to say it's not served the public well. Indeed, it's been a disaster, in my view, because the free market like that just doesn't work when it comes to public transport, because you need a public transport service that serves all communities, not just those where there's the biggest amount of money to be made. So you look at the bus system in Greater Manchester, bus on Oxford Road like that, one after another. Some estates, parts of Hindley Green, like you're just saying, nothing at all. And that's the product of the system that we've had. So Greater Manchester, when it asked for devolution, it also asked for the power to change the way the buses work. And a bill went through Parliament to give us that power. To be fair to the government, they didn't want to do it, but they did do it. And we're still waiting now just for another order to go through Parliament so that we can use those powers. And we can begin to change the way the buses work and be fair to all communities. Now, as ever, it's like an answer that politicians give. It's not going to happen tomorrow, unfortunately. But in time, we'll be able to build a bus system that puts the public first rather than profits. And that's what we need in Greater Manchester. So, you know, I fully understand the point that you're making. It's going back to the point that Paul made before about the money that London gets. You know, London gets so much more money for transport For those of you who don't go there very often, it's £1.50 per bus journey in London. And when you've paid your £1.50, you can get on any bus for the next hour without paying. So here, you can pay £4 for a single fare in Greater Manchester. It's just not right, because we don't have that same ability to regulate the system. And, you know, we need a much fairer, more affordable system. So I agree with you, but as I sit here again tonight, I can't say to you it's going to be next year by the time it's solved. It will take some time to use the powers to get the bus system back into where it should be. So what happens is TFGM try as best they can to subsidise services, but sometimes then the bus companies will say, well, we're not running that anymore unless you give us more money. And I'd have to look into the precise example behind the one you're saying, but, you know, the problem is then the bus companies are almost making TFGM throw more and more money at the service to keep it running. The truth is we haven't got enough money in the subsidies anyway to run the bus system that we want, and we're often beholden to the private operators who try and increase the grants that they get. So the system just doesn't work, and that's why we want to change it.
It's actually made it so that they're wanting two services. They're wanting one to Trafford Centre now, and then they're wanting 33 just from Eccles to Manchester. So.
Bob, do you want to say anything very quickly on it? Because it's a really fair point, isn't it? And I don't know whether you just wanted to give an answer as well.
Yeah, picking up on what Andy said, the bus operators will regulate a service, they'll register it, they will operate it, and they will make money. The moment they stop making money, they deregister that, and that means no service unless we can subsidise the service. But the demand is greater than the funding available, unfortunately.
So that's how the current system works, and that's why we want to change it.
Why can't TFGM run their own services?
The legislation prevents it, doesn't it? Am I right in saying? So the government has refused to allow. I mean, whereas the trains could be done in that way, we can't run buses in that way. So the legislation rules out public ownership of buses. Whether we can make an arm's length organisation to run them, I don't know. I don't think that's been tested legally, but is possible. I don't know. But yeah.
You own a percentage of the airport.
Yeah, because obviously Manchester Airport was built before there were rules to stop us doing that. So the 10 councils were very clever actually in the way that they built up Manchester Airport. And in other parts of the country, I think Nottingham, they did keep public ownership of their buses, I think I'm right in saying, and the government legislation can't make them sell it off. Am I right? Have I got that right? Pardon? But you can't do new ones. So places that got ahead of that legislation could do it, but you can't now create a new one under the legislation, if that makes sense.
Right, thank you. That's all we've got time for tonight, I'm afraid. Okay.
I don't mind that. I don't mind that staying and answering another one if that's yeah.
The microphone.
Like I say, I know it's the last question, but other things have taken over. But I just think it's quite an important thing in relation to mental health. You know, the services, the way the health system is all changing and everything like that. I went to a lay members meeting in relation to the local care authority, and their priorities were, I was reading because I had to write it down. It was local care alliance in Bury is focusing on adult community services and social care, which is why I said that's a problem. When I looked at that and I went through that presentation with them, there was nothing in there about mental health. So we're talking about the fundamental changes that you're going to put into Bury. Yet local care alliance is supposed to be covering everything. There was nothing in there about mental health. And when I've asked, they said, well, the priority is really, from what I could see, was the acute side of it, being up the beds and treating people all getting there, which is all fair enough, that's good. But what are we going to do about mental health? Because I went somewhere today, research place in relation to young people's mental health research unit, and I was just discussing it with them today. She said, this lady said to me, could I ask you, Andy, this one? It's like, our CCGs, including Bury CCG, meeting the mental health investment standard, I don't know what this means, it might mean something to yourself, meeting the mental health investment standard as requested by NHS England. certain standard in relation to mental health. But from what I've seen at that meeting, it's not being addressed. It's not even in the ballpark.
I don't know whether Rishi wants to I can say something because I don't know the ins and outs of all the specific case, but I can give you a general answer on mental health that might help with Rishi.
So I attend the partnership board meetings for our local care alliance, and I can assure you mental health is a priority. It was initially hosted, our LCA, by Pennine Care, who help provide our mental health services, and of course the council also provides mental health services. In terms of Bury CCG, mental health is a key work stream that we're working on with the council, because we know it's a priority, and we know we can do better. You can always do better. It's a key priority in terms of children's mental health and adults' mental health, support within schools and support for adults as well. So I'm not sure what was in the presentation, but I can assure you it's a priority, and it's something that's been made a priority by the Mayor across the whole of Greater Manchester as well. I would just add, you know, there was £140 million made available for mental health services across Greater Manchester. Bury has got a share of that. I think £80 million is made available for children's mental health. So all CCGs have got additional funding around mental health services. As we work in a world of greater health and social care integration, mental health is key. So certainly from a commissioning side, and I can get you more details from the provider side as well.
Well, I'll have a talk with you after you don't mind, but are you going to do something? Because there's a middle group that are being missed. The 21s to the 25s, they're not getting any help. That's where, you know, we're concentrating on the adult mental health and also the young children. But there's that group that are not getting any help at all. And they're the ones, you know, we're going on about people living longer and the things. Well, mental health is a big thing. So you've got a group of children now who are not getting any treatment for mental health, who will bring on other ailments earlier, and then you just bring in another thing forward. You know, so
well,
sort of like said today, sorry.
Yeah,
today.
no, do,
As
no,
I
sure.
said today, you know, because we're talking about mental health strategy, because things don't change. It's a generational thing, isn't it? So you need to, for me, you need to be looking at that mental health strategy every 10 years, because it's like the 21 years, 20 years, they're all texting, they're all social media. You've got the young ones coming through now, it's all Game Boys, you know, all things like that. And that's going to affect them. And, you know, do you ever
Game Boys are a bit out of date there, I think. They were then.
I don't play games, but you can't get them off the thing. Do you know what I mean? It's like, we just seem to be fighting, trying to put the rights now. It's like, you know, my past life was in the fire service, and all the things now, it's about going into the houses and things like that. It takes a long time to change those things. Yeah. And I just feel you're putting some things in now, but they won't come to fruition till maybe 10, 15 years, and then it'll be something else, and it won't be treating the ones that are there.
On this, I'm going to just wholeheartedly agree with you. I've been saying this for years. Said it when I was health secretary, when I was shadow health secretary. Mental health has always been the poor relation of the NHS. So if you look at the history of the NHS, it's 70 this year. Mental health, it's always massively prioritised physical health over mental health, to the point where the mental health budget has been less than 10% of the NHS budget. And it's always been, you know, on the fringes, separate institutions, separate trusts. Always been the poor relation. The problem, there's a big problem with that generally, but it's even bigger an issue when in the 21st century, mental health is the issue for the reasons I was giving earlier, because everyone's living life in a more stressful, insecure world and hasn't got enough money, 0 hours. You know, mental health is the issue of our times, and yet we aren't correctly prioritising it within the NHS budget, as you're saying. And actually, it's younger people who are seriously missing out. The CAMS budget, children and adolescent mental health, is a fraction of the overall mental health budget. So Rishi's right. Greater Manchester, recognising this, took a decision last year. I think it was 165 million that we said we were going to put in additional to mental health to begin to make up this gap. And within that, we prioritised children and young people. And what we've said this year is the government are saying they're going to give an increase to the NHS. We've already committed saying that the vast majority of that increase should go to mental health services. So we're making those commitments. One of the things that it's paid for, to pick up on what Rishi is saying, we've launched a mentally healthy schools pilot. So using this new money, we've funded a counselling service in secondary schools where the students can go to get independent advice and support if they're experiencing stress, anxiety, depression. And we think we're going to roll it out to all secondary schools in Greater Manchester. So You're right, this is the issue of our times, but at the moment, the demand for services and the need for services is way ahead of the actual funding and provision of services. And sadly, it's often younger people, younger adults, who lose out the most. But I just agree with you, and I'm glad you've raised the question, because it's a massive issue.
Right, we are going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Andy.
No worries. Thank you to you, Sarah.